On the quiet morning of the 28th before Tet, as lanterns were hung and Bon Chung leaves were prepared, Linda suddenly froze. Was it just a baby's gentle kick, or a sign that something wasn't right? Hello, everyone. I wish you a peaceful and healthy day. Today, we'll step into a tender chapter of Linda and Quang's journey, decorating their home, preparing for Tet, and holding on to calm as they wait for their baby's safe arrival. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Early morning on the 28th day before Tet felt careful in their wooden house. Pale sunlight slid through the slats and painted soft lines on the floor. Linda moved from the kitchen to the living room with slow steps, one hand supporting her big pregnant belly, the other holding a small bundle of red envelopes. Quang came out with his hair still damp, a towel over his shoulder. He watched her pause before the low table, like the short walk asked more of her than it used to. "Morning," he said. "Morning." Linda eased herself down and set the bundle on the table. She exhaled, quiet, controlled, the kind of breath that meant she didn't want anyone to worry. Quang didn't argue. He brought a mug of warm water, placed it within reach, then crouched and laid his palm against her belly. The baby pushed back, small, firm, unmistakable. Quang smiled in that unguarded way he saved for her. "Good morning," he murmured. Linda's eyes warmed. "He's been awake since before dawn." "And you?" Quang asked. She lifted one shoulder. "I couldn't get comfortable." Quang stood, gentle but focused. "Then we do it slow today. No standing too long, no reaching, no carrying." Linda smirked. "More rules." "I'm protecting my favorite people," he said, gaze flicking to her belly with a mix of awe and worry. He opened the box of decorations, red banners, paper cuttings, string lights, a lantern folded flat. Linda sorted envelopes into stacks, smoothing each one with her thumb as if she could smooth the year ahead. Quang climbed onto a sturdy stool near the front beam and held the lantern up. "Is this okay?" "A little lower," Linda said, "so next year our kid can reach it." He paused, then lowered it by a few inches, careful with the nail. The lantern swung gently when he stepped down, bright against the morning light. Quang tested the string lights. Small bulbs blinked warm and steady. He draped them along the beam and adjusted a drooping section. Linda raised a hand, instinctively wanting to fix it, then stopped. Quang noticed and shook his head once. "No, I know." He finished the adjustment, then brushed his knuckles along her cheek. "You do the choosing, I do the climbing." Linda leaned into the touch for a heartbeat, then laughed. "Strict?" "My wife is very pregnant," he said, and she rolled her eyes, smiling anyway. The living room changed little by little. Quang placed a vase on the table. Linda tucked kumquat branches inside, careful not to twist. A red banner went up near the door. Quang moved chairs out of her way without making it a conversation. When they reached the ancestor altar, Linda stopped. Her expression settled into something calm. She picked up a clean cloth. "I want to do this," she said. Quang nodded. "I'm right here." Linda stood close, her big belly nearly brushing the edge of the table. She wiped the surface slowly, with reverence, breathing evenly. Quang arranged fruit and lit a candle, keeping things centered and simple. Halfway through, Linda's palm went to her belly again. "He's kicking," she whispered. Quang placed his hand over hers. The baby kicked again, stronger, pressing against both their palms. Quang swallowed, eyes fixed on the movement he could feel. Linda looked up at him. "He knows we're making it ready." Quang kissed her temple. "Then we'll keep making it ready," he said, and helped her sit before she had to ask. Late morning found them in the kitchen. A basin of water waited on the counter. A stack of dong leaves sat nearby, deep green and glossy. Linda took the chair closest to the sink, knees slightly apart because her belly demanded space, a towel folded on her lap. Quang washed the leaves one by one, fingers tracing along the veins to check for tears. Linda wiped them gently and stacked them, taking her time. The work was quiet and oddly comforting, like each cleaned leaf was one more small promise kept. "You're too good at this," Linda said. "I'm trying not to embarrass myself in front of my mom," Quang replied. Linda smiled. "She'll still find something to correct." "She always does." Quang glanced at her face, reading it. "But she'll smile when she sees you." Linda's smile softened, and a flicker of nerves showed. "I want it to be good," she admitted. "I want our baby to have a real tet." Quang dried his hands and bent to meet her eyes. "He won't remember the lantern," he said gently, "but he'll feel you calm." Linda let out a small laugh. "You talk like a doctor." "I talk like a husband who listens to you breathe at night," Quang said, and her shoulders eased. They moved to the ingredients. Glutinous rice soaked in a bowl, pearly and heavy. Mung beans drained in a colander. Quang sliced pork belly into thick pieces, seasoned it with salt, pepper, and shallots, then covered everything neatly. Linda watched with both hands resting on her big, pregnant belly. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we'll wrap them." "Tomorrow," Quang agreed. "Today we prepare." Linda shifted forward to reach for a bowl, and her breath caught. Tight heaviness, a reminder of limits. Quang's head turned immediately. "Linda, I'm okay," she said quickly. He slid her chair back a little so she had room and brought the warm mug again. "Small sips," he said. Linda obeyed, breathing slower. A faint sheen appeared at her hairline. When the heaviness passed, frustration rose in her eyes. "I hate needing breaks," she whispered. Quang crouched beside her. "I love that you take them," he replied. "It means you're keeping both of you safe." Linda swallowed. "I want to do everything. I want to feel like I'm part of it." "You are," Quang said without hesitation. He lifted her hand and placed it back on her belly. "You're the biggest part." Right then, the baby kicked, as if agreeing. Linda's mouth curved into a real smile, relief slipping in. The rest of the day moved in gentle tasks. Quang carried the heavy items, set bowls where she could reach them, covered the leaves with a clean towel. Linda chose what went where, checked the lists, decided which ribbons matched which branch. Outside, faint music drifted from a neighbor's radio, old Tet songs softened by distance. When the kitchen was orderly again, Linda leaned back in her chair, both hands resting on her big, pregnant belly, and let herself breathe. Quang stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her shoulders, careful and steady. They stayed like that, listening to the quiet house and the soft movement of a baby inside her. Quang lowered his chin to the top of her head. "Thank you," he murmured. Linda smiled with her eyes closed. "For what?" "For trusting me to carry the heavy things," he said. Linda's smile deepened. "Just don't drop the lantern." Quang chuckled. "Never," he promised, and in that simple word the house felt ready. Quang kept his arms around her a moment longer, then stepped back so she could turn and face him. The kitchen still carried the clean scent of rinsed leaves and warm water. Linda shifted carefully, one hand supporting her big pregnant belly as she stood. "Come outside with me," she said. "Just for a minute." Quang grabbed a light jacket and followed her onto the porch. The air had that end-of-year sharpness that felt more awake than cold. A delivery bike rolled up to their gate. Quang signed for a potted kumquat tree and carried it in both arms, careful with each step. The tiny fruit looked like little suns. Linda's face brightened. "That's it. That's the one. You chose it," Quang said. "I just did the heavy part." She guided him to the porch corner where the light hit. "Here, so we see it the moment we open the door." Quang set the pot down, rotated it an inch at a time, then crouched to make sure the base sat flat. Linda held out a strip of red ribbon she'd cut earlier. "Tie one bow," she said. "Not too tight." He tied it. The loops were uneven. Linda's eyes crinkled. "Cute." "That's not a compliment," Quang said, already retying it. "I didn't say it wasn't," she teased, and kept her hands on her belly, letting him finish. When the bow finally looked right, touched her belly again, expressions softening as if she'd felt something shift inside. Quang leaned in, ear near her sweater, then lifted his head with a quiet smile. "He's listening." A voice floated over the fence. "Decorating already?" Aunt Han stood in her yard with a small basket of tangerines, smiling like she'd been waiting for this sight. Her eyes went straight to Linda's belly. "Linda, look at you," Han said. "Beautiful. And you," she added to Quang, "you've turned into a full-time assistant." Quang didn't pretend otherwise. "Yes, Auntie." Han handed over 2 tangerines. "Eat. Don't rush. These last days, everyone forgets to breathe." Her gaze softened on Linda. "Be careful, okay? Let him climb. Let him carry." "I am," Linda said, honest. "Good." Han waved. "Happy Tet, you two." "Happy Tet," Linda called after her, and her voice carried warmth long after Han disappeared. Back inside, the house felt brighter, not just from decorations, but from the way they moved through it together. Quang opened the windows for a cross breeze. Linda sat at the table and sorted small charms and paper blossoms into a tray, pausing often to rest her hands on her big, pregnant belly. Quang reached up to a high shelf and pulled down a small wooden box. He set it in front of her. Linda opened it and went still. Inside were the baby things they'd gathered quietly. A tiny cotton hat, a pair of mittens, 2 pairs of socks folded so small they barely looked real. "I forgot we had these," she whispered. "You didn't forget," Quang said. "You saved them." Linda lifted one sock and pressed the soft fabric between her fingers, eyes shining with something tender and a little scared. She held the hat against her belly, and the contrast made her swallow hard. Quang sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He didn't rush her out of the feeling. Linda breathed in, then out. "I want it to be peaceful," she said quietly. "No surprises. Not now." Quang nodded. He stood and went to the kitchen, touching each stove knob, then the gas valve, then the big pot they'd set aside. Practical, steady movements, like he was stacking calm on top of fear. He returned with a folded cushion and placed it behind her lower back. "Better?" he asked. Linda leaned into it and nodded. "Better." Quang rested his palm on her belly only after she guided his hand there. The baby rolled, then pushed once, firm and certain. Quang's face softened. "He's here," Linda said, voice barely above a breath. "He's here," Quang repeated, and his thumb moved in a slow circle. They went back to small tasks. Linda chose where the paper charms would go, pointing rather than moving too much. Quang taped each one in place, near the rice jar beside the family photo on the cabinet door. When she reached higher than she should, Quang gently caught her wrist. "No," he said, calm. Linda sighed, half annoyed, half relieved. "Fine." He stepped in, taped it for her, then kissed the top of her head. Linda's shoulders relaxed beneath the kiss. As late afternoon slipped toward dusk, Quang made a simple meal: rice, steamed greens, and a small bowl of braised pork. Linda sat nearby, keeping him company, asking him to taste, reminding him she liked the broth a touch saltier. He listened. They ate at the small table with the lantern outside, casting a gentle light through the window. Linda's big belly nudged the edge of the table, and Quang shifted her chair back a few inches. She met his eyes, grateful, and that was enough. After dinner, Quang washed dishes while Linda sat in the living room, folding the baby socks with careful precision. She stacked them in the wooden box, then paused, fingertips resting on the soft fabric as if she were memorizing what her hands would soon hold. Quang came in drying his hands on a towel. He sat beside her and looked at the little pile, expression tender. "Tired?" he asked. "A little," Linda admitted, "but it's a good tired." Quang nodded. He slid the hat back into the box, then closed the lid gently, not hiding it, just keeping it safe. He placed it in the drawer they'd chosen for baby things, the drawer that was slowly becoming a promise. Linda leaned back, one hand settling on her belly again. The lights blinked quietly along the beam, warm and steady. Outside, the neighborhood noises softened into distant laughter. Linda's eyelids grew heavy. Before she fully drifted into rest, she reached for Quang's hand and guided it to her belly. The baby gave one last small push, and Quang's thumb stroked a slow circle. Linda smiled, eyes half closed. "Peaceful," she whispered. Quang lowered his forehead to hers. Inside, everything feels held, and they sat there while the house held that gentle, ordinary, already making the room feel full.
Linda và Linda theo bà và cậu cháu ra nương mía dưới nắng sớm. Bà vừa chặt mía vừa kể chuyện ngày xưa. Dậy chặt 3 hoặc 4 khúc cho đẹp để bán được giá. Đồng mía cao dần, 45 đồng trở thành hy vọng cho phiên chợ. Một cây mía đổ bất ngờ khiến cả nhóm kêu rồi cười xòa vì kịp đỡ nhau. Chiều xuống, Linda buồn bã vì con rúi của mình đã biến mất. Nghi có kẻ trộm rình quanh nhà. CEO Quang ghé đến lắng nghe và trấn an và tự sửa chiếc camera cũ trong kho, kéo dây lắp trước sân nhà để bảo vệ cô. Đêm đến, Linda nấu cơm nếp cẩm mời anh ở lại ăn. Hai người trò chuyện lòng ấm lại. Quang kể áp lực công ty, camera nháy sáng, bóng lạ thoáng qua, và không biết Linda có sống sót qua được đêm nay không. Mọi người nếu thấy video hay, hãy cho mình một like, một subscribe. Cảm ơn mọi người nhé.